And then there is former Prime Minister Zapatero of Spain, who was attacked for anti-Semitism, was defended as merely an anti-Zionist, and then had it come out that at a dinner party in 2005, he had ended his anti-Zionist rant with the following words: "At times one can even understand that there might be people who could justify the Holocaust." Whoops. These are not isolated incidents. For example, a local chapter of the Social Democrats in the German city of Hagen put charges on Facebook alleging that Zionists controlled the media. Of course, they said Zionists while making the classic Jew-hating charge. But with Ms. Voeschel, somehow the mask slipped, or simply she slipped, perhaps without even noticing it, from anti-Zionism into straight Jew-hatred. Were the good progressives in Hagen far behind her, if at all? Who can say? But also, at a certain point, who cares? It is enough to conclude that anti-Zionism has a strong tendency to morph into straight old-fashioned Jew-hatred. Similarly, what is one to think of the publication by a Swedish newspaper of the bizarre story that Israelis were killing Palestinian children in order to sell the body parts to rich Jews in New York? A medical impossibility. The kernel of truth in it is that an Israeli forensic institute was for some years, ending in 2000, using organs from, quote, Israeli soldiers, civilians, Palestinians, and foreign workers whose bodies they had charge of, and doing so without getting consent. This was converted into a modern version of the old bloodline. While the Swedish ambassador to Israel condemned the article, the Swedish government retracted the condemnation and found it free of racism. This led the anti-Zionist British Liberal politician, Baroness Tong, when asked if, on the basis of that charge, one should investigate the Israeli humanitarian mission for the Haitian earthquake victims to make sure they weren't killing Haitian children, to answer that indeed Israel should investigate itself just to make sure, thus lending the slander credibility. Criticism of Israel? Sure. In the form of classic Jew-hatred? Well, that too, I'm afraid. The culmination of this kind of Jew-hating anti-Zionism was reached in an event worthy of the Onion. The Norwegian branch of the European anti-racism organization called SOS Racisme called for the exclusion of Zionists from, of all things, the annual commemoration of Kristallnacht, that notorious night in Nazi Germany when Jewish synagogues were burned and shops broken into and destroyed. What it takes to exclude Jews who support the survival of a Jewish state from a rally mourning the exclusion of Jews from society is hard to comprehend. Ideological zeal goes a long way, but where it goes in this case is all too familiar territory. Second, to be anti-Zionist means to be pro-Arab, no doubt for all the progressive reasons. You side with the oppressed, the marginalized, the colonized, the third world, etc. But that means making cause with people who are all too often perfectly unashamed to hate Jews, and who have for a generation been taught the most extreme forms of Jew-hatred. In Europe, it was above all the Arab protesters who were shouting things like death to the Jews, but no non-Middle Easterners in the ranks seemed to mind much. The same kind of thing has happened on American campuses, where anti-Zionism has, with Arab students, been given expression occasionally in anti-Jewish ways, among them calling a pro-Israel student a dirty kike. It is hard to separate even notionally Jews as Jews from Jews as the Jewish people, and with Israel as a state of the Jewish people, hard to keep apart in practice what is meant to be sundered in theory, especially when you're allied with people who have no interest whatever in separating them. Consequently, in Europe today, outright anti-Semitism is no longer just a matter of what Arabs say. Of course, the European right has crawled out from the rock it usually lives under, but the left too is becoming openly hostile to Jews, as the German, Spanish, and Swedish examples unmistakably indicate. Third, progressivism lives, as I argued above, on indignation and anger. Denouncing is what progressives seem to do best and to like best. That is built in, by the way, to, and perhaps the cause of, the allegiance to simple binaries of the saved and the damned. I understand. I am not impervious to the charms of indignation myself, as somebody might point out. But when one is angry, one becomes A, dumber, and B, less scrupulous about weaponry. An angry person hits below the belt and tends to use whatever stereotype or image that he or she thinks is going to hurt. Perhaps this explains what happened to Zapatero. Even if one is conscious that one might be getting close to a line when it isn't supposed to cross, one tries to get it as close to it as possible, perhaps like Professor Salaita, and still be able to plead sort of innocent. What, for example, are we to think of the decision of the student government of the University of Durban in South Africa, Durban, to call on the administration to ban Jewish students. Although maybe some could stay if they swore allegiance to the Palestinian cause. Jew hatred? Well, how could it not be? But wait, maybe it's just anti-Zionism. Just? At a certain point, it's a distinction without a difference. And here, I have to add something I would very much rather not to have to add. At Kenyon, we are devoted to free and civil speech on the most controversial issues, and thus the invitation by KSJP to Professor Salaita to speak 2 weeks ago or so was perfectly proper. However, when a department or a program co-sponsors a speaker, it is unmistakably a judgment about their respectability and an advertisement to their students to go to hear him or her. In this case, 2 departments and 2 programs. I thought it was 3 departments, but I've been told that was inaccurate. All co-sponsored Professor Salaita's lecture, thus giving him a very significant degree of affirmation in this college. I am all but certain that no one who had said publicly about any other ethnic group what Professor Salaita said about Jews would have been invited, much less gotten such lavish co-sponsorship. Imagine someone who says when a Hispanic child is kidnapped, "I wish all of them would disappear." Invited to Kenyon? In your nightmares. Of course, he or she might have said, "Not all of them, just the ones around here." Is that any better? Hardly. Do we invite them and co-sponsor them to give their view of the matter here at Kenyon? Right, I thought not. So why is it unobjectionable when it is Jews? Not because the departments and programs in question as such contain Jew haters. To the contrary. Rather it is that in the name of that primitive, popular religion of progressivism, designated victims are allowed enormous leeway of abusiveness, and designated oppressors, which here includes the 6 million Jews of Israel and their supporters around the world, have no right to call foul. According to Professor Salaita, here's another tweet, anyone who defended Israel in trying to stop Hamas's rocket attacks is, quote, an awful human being. Thanks, Professor. I like you too. The overlap between progressivism and ethnic hatred is obvious. And where one bleeds into the other isn't all that detectable, though over time the results are perfectly palatable. So at Kenyon now, it must be said, as a matter of fact, that someone who really speaks with enormous hatefulness about Jews, and yes indeed, sometimes the mask slips and he talks of Jews, not just Israelis, is acceptable at Kenyon as long as he or she explains that this is progressivism, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, anything politically correct and not Jew hatred. This, I think, is a very big deal, a big landmark, not just on this question, but in the life of the college. Unasked for advice for anti-Zionists. Western anti-Zionists typically claim not to be Jew haters. In a way, that might be thought to be enough. After all, what Jew haters in the past, even the so-called scientific anti-Semites, were in the end perfectly willing to admit they hated Jews. But after the Nazis gave anti-Semitism a bad name, it is understandable that very few people in the West want to admit that they hate Jews. So as we have seen, it is perfectly possible to use anti-Zionism as a mask for Jew hatred. So when is it and when isn't it? As argued above, there's a gray area in which not only the listener, but even the person, him or himself, may not be sure. Over the years, I think I've developed a pretty good ear for what is and what isn't, but I'm of course biased, and I am both Jewish and pro-Israel. And while I try very hard not to be oversensitive, it wouldn't be surprising if I am. To me, the telltale sign is when the mask slips and someone says Jews, when he or she is supposed to say Zionists or right-wing neoconservatives, or like Zapatero makes it clear that it's the Jews and not just Israel that he hates. And that does occasionally happen. But short of that, there are other signs that I take seriously. Above all, really hateful speech about Jews. Yes, even ones who live on the West Bank or right-wing rabbis is usually a pretty good giveaway. The use of classic Jew-hating images and tropes is another one that suggests something is going quite sour. But it is in fact a gray area, and one should not make the charge unless one is pretty sure. Then, however, one has to do it unless one doesn't care if what is happening today in much of the world begins, as it in fact has already begun to happen here. Still, principled anti-Zionists who don't want to be confused with Jew haters could do some things that would help both them and the general discourse. The most important is to do more than just repeat that, heaven forfend, they aren't anti-Semites. When they see Jew hatred among their friends and allies, they have to stand up against it, dissociate themselves from it, fight it actively, and not make meeching apologies even for borderline cases. Of course, I'm asking for something counterintuitive. You don't want to fight with your allies, especially your most fervent supporters. You want to fight the common foe, and so you tend to overlook what you can justify as mere solecisms or as the excessively expressed anger of your friends. But as the saying goes, he who touches pitch shall be defiled. And if you want to have others believe the distinction you claim to live by, you have to take the trouble to keep yourselves clean. For instance, in South Africa recently, quote, an organization called COSAS, Congress of South African Students who are affiliated with the ruling African National Congress, decided it would be a good idea to place a pig's head in the kosher section of a Woolworth's grocery store in the suburb of Sea Point. The aim, according to the perpetrators, was preventing, quote, people who will not eat pork to pretend that they are eating clean meat when it is sold by hands dripping with the blood of Palestinian children. Although the local BDS claimed it did not support the action, it was equally quick to justify it by saying it was done with a good intention of helping the people of Palestine. BDS's refusal to support the action means that they recognized that COSAS had crossed the line into spread Jew hatred. Good for them. But when they felt they had to excuse it, partially by pointing to the doers' good motives, they made it very hard to believe that they are fundamentally different from the COSAS thugs and not just a bit more prudent. Beyond that, it would be helpful if anti-Zionists could break at least a little bit with the Manichaean orthodoxy of the progressive religion and show that they have some human understanding of the other side. In other words, make your case without demonizing. That's asking for too much, I imagine, since that would probably mean standing fundamentally apart from your religion, which is, after all, if not secular jihad, then surely secular crusade. Still, it would help. Summary and conclusion. Anti-Zionism is not as such Jew hatred, but it tends to go there very easily. Anti-Zionists should be given the benefit of the doubt, but it would be very helpful if they would make it easier to do so. Now I will take your questions. Thank you for being here. Why do they use the term Zionism?
Yeah, because Zionism was the term a movement to found a state. Yeah. That's done.
Well, they don't like to call it Israel. They like to call it the Zionist entity. I'm going to show you one of Salaita's books, the entity. And Zionism, as you know, has a long, long history as a scary word. The UN passed a resolution, I think back in the 70s, that Zionism was racist. And it's all connected with the idea of Jewish supremacy. The Jews who think they're better than everybody else. They have infinite ambitions, yeah? It's spookier that way. And they don't like to say Israel. They don't like to put it on the map, right? So it's convenient. And also, the truth is, it's not just Israel. It's people like me who aren't in Israel who support it. And what are we? Zionists. So that's why they use the term. And it's not simply foolish. Yeah.
How do you respond to criticisms that Palestinians did not accept peace or state treaties or solutions because it was a fully Jewish plan and didn't adhere to their needs? How?
Well, look, I mean, the simple answer to that one is, if you don't like the 2000 proposal or the 2009 proposal, but you're seriously interested in making the deal, you make a counteroffer. They never did. The kinds of reasons they gave were things like, the temple was never in Jerusalem, it was in Hebron. Sure, but it was and Arafat, after the failure of Camp David, for which, by the way, Bill Clinton was desperate to get his Nobel Prize that way, really, really blamed him, made a speech in Arabic in which he said, why should I make peace with Israel? It's like a crusader state. In 50 years, it won't be there. And there's a tweet by Steven Salaita which says pretty much the same thing. It says, I know that I eat fatty foods and smoke cigarettes, but I think I've got a good chance to outlive Israel. Yeah? I mean, the two-state solution, that was something to believe in. as maybe something that might work between 67 and 2000. And one could be impatient with the Israelis. Why didn't you make a deal? After the first intifada, which was a real intifada, they had a shot. They had a shot to make a deal with the mayors of certain West Coast cities, and they did the second stupidest thing that Israel has ever done. They said, no, no, we can't control this. We need Arafat to come back from Tunis. And Arafat played them like a pianola until Ariel Sharon played him. They had a chance. By 2000, Arafat was back, and when they offered it, when the Barak government offered it, they weren't interested in it. And they weren't interested in 2009. And now, to their credit, it seems to me, the sham of the two-state solution, you talk to KSJP, you talk to people who argue the Arab cause, they're not interested in the two-state solution. They want the one-state solution. They want an Arab state. Now, they'll tell you that everything will be fine for the 6 million Jews that we've taken over, and if you believe that, I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. But that's always been the issue. Yeah, I mean, one side, look, I mean, this will probably offend some of you, but I'm going to say. When you have two sides with real claims, and God knows the Arabs have real claims, serious claims, and yet so do the Jews. They have claims from international law, the mandate, the UN resolution. They have historical claims. Going back, there have always been Jews in the Holy Land to the extent they were allowed. Yeah, Jerusalem is the holiest city for the Jews. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand lose its cunning, my tongue forget to speak, how to speak. There are a lot of, and on top of it, there's 6 million Jews there who can't, Helen Thomas once said, why don't they just go home to their homes in Poland and Germany? Helen Thomas, the doyen of the Washington Press Corps, American Lebanese origins, tells you something about the Washington Press Corps. Why do they go home to Poland and Germany? Gee, I wonder why. And better yet, why don't they go home to Iraq and Yemen and Ethiopia and Russia? Gee, I wonder why. They're there. Yeah, there was an old slogan from the gay movement, right, in the 1970s and 80s. We're here, we're queer, get used to it. Well, you couldn't quite make that work for the Jews. We're here, we're very strange, but get used to it, right? They have a claim. And when there are two sides that have a claim, we're taught in our culture from age 5 on to share. Now, you don't want to have a temper tantrum and say, it's all mine, it's mine. You share. That is not the only kind of culture there is. There is also honor culture. And in an honor culture, which is what you have in Homer's Iliad, and what you had all in Europe, many places, you're never supposed to mention the Nazi analogy, but Hitler too. Hitler talked about the Treaty of Versailles, which was a bad treaty for Germany, as Geschmack, meaning the scandal, the humiliation, oh, the humanity of it all, it was just terrible. Well, for the Arabs, the creation of Israel isn't just a bad thing, it's the Nakba. It's the disgrace, the shame, the humiliation. And that doesn't allow for compromise. So you've got a side who's existentially claims, we got to have it all. So it's very hard to argue about this, that detail of the two-state solution. It's not on the table. It hasn't been for a long time. I wish it were. I think the settlements were the biggest mistake the Israelis ever made. Put them on the wrong side. Made them look like the bad guys. But it was also a very hard mistake to avoid. Yeah? But when you're dealing with people who see it as an insult, yeah, that you are there, that you exist, then it's very hard to operate with the rationality of arbitration and compromise. Give me an example, by the way. Yeah, Rose.
Yeah, why couldn't there be a one-state solution with representation from both parties within the government? It's sort of equal representation.
Yeah. Look, I think someday that might actually be feasible. But what it would take is a two-state solution, a long period of overcoming old quarrels and distrust, a lot of economic cooperation, And at a certain point, with very different people involved, maybe that would happen. But if you did it now, you're dealing with people who, from age 3, are raised to be suicide bombers, who, when any Jews are murdered, pass out candy in the streets. That's not going to work. No way. Let me give you an example. This is a tweet from Salaita, which I think is extraordinarily interesting. And it states the Arab position pretty much clearly. Find it. I really want to find it. Sorry. Yeah. The entity, hashtag, always has a pretext to bomb Palestinians, tunnels, rockets. Sorry, to bomb. Palestinians, the entity always has a pretext to bomb Palestinians. Tunnels, rockets, and Hamas are just another way of saying not Jewish. Hashtag Gaza. That's a real interesting one. Because what it says on the one hand is where the mask slips and he starts talking about Jews and Jewish supremacy and all that. But the other one is this. Tunnels in which you're going to go through to murder Jews, that's just a pretext. 3,000 rockets, that's just a pretext. Hamas, an organization designed to murder all Jews, that's what it says in its Article 7. That's just a pretext. All they really want to do is hurt us because we're not Jewish. Yeah? That point of view is this. We are in the right, holy. Arab nations have taken this view. There is no such thing as terrorism directed against Israel for Arab nations. They're all against terrorism. That's not terrorism. That's resistance. Whatever you do is okay because you're the wrong party and you have to get them. And that necessarily leads to demonization. The only way you can justify that is to say we're up against monsters. And that's where the demonization that operates in certain parts of simple progressivism, not all parts, but some of them, they go together. And that's the problem. You know? You change the people, you change the world, you change the culture, you change the historical experience. That's what the Israeli left always thought, very naively. Why? When they see that we can help them technologically and with irrigation, and we can kick out their evil Arab landlords, we will all be socialists together. Oh yes! No, it didn't work that way. That was an inadequate account of their psychology. They didn't like it. Here's Salaita again, talking about a speech he gave in which he really talks about how Israel has destroyed the Arab Palestine with all this development and all these suburbs and all these buildings. And even the trees that Israel built in the hills of Judea, which were eroded and terrible, they've made it beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful places to drive through the Judean hills with all these trees. He criticizes them because the trees facilitate development and they plant trees to create geostrategic gentrification in an orientalized theme park for those of a certain ethnic background. We don't even like your damn trees, right? It goes against our essence. A Palestinian negotiator once was asked, would there be a possibility in a Palestinian state of any Jews living there? In the same way that there are plenty of Arabs living in Israel, and our more religious Christian Arabs are far more religiously free than in Palestine. And his answer was, you'd have to change my Palestinian DNA before that could happen. It's a matter of fundamental identity. That's not one you can finesse this way. Yeah? You might be able to do it someday, but not now. All right.
You've impressively shown how anti-Semitism is at the root of so much that's going on in the world. Could you say some more about the root of anti-Semitism itself?
Yeah,
Why so much of it in the book? So
What's
why so much Jew hate?
Yeah. No, I obviously, like you probably, I've thought about this all my life. What? How come it's us? And you know, Jews historically whatever they do is wrong. If you live separately and you look funny and you wear payas and all that, the skull cap, you're weird, you're different, you're not one of us, you have to be expelled. So in the 19th century, they assimilated. Oh boy, we're Christians now. Or we're very reformed. My father was very reformed. And so he said in our conservative shul, if it doesn't have an organ and a choir, it's not a Jewish service. I mean, they were as a high Lutheran as they could get. Did it make a difference? No! No! Because now they were being sneaky and creeping in. It's that religion people problem. Gershon Scholem's written about it. You try to assimilate, that doesn't work. You try to separate, doesn't work. You go, you finally do what they say, Zionism, right? Where's that come from? Herzl, the Dreyfus riots. Boy, they really want us out of here. Let's go to our own country. Phew! Now they'll be happy. No! Right? What that is about, I don't know. I've spent my whole life worrying about it. I think it has something to do with the bad conscience of Christians in some complicated way, but it's not just Christians. And it also might be said that, you know, we have our faults. We tend to be impolite, obnoxious, rude with each other. And I mean, I've been told in the Arab world, the rudeness of the Israeli soldiers on the West Bank is a big, big part of it. That's part of the style in Israel, right? Frank. It doesn't go over well. There was a Bulgarian prime minister in the 1920s who Jews supported heavily, who defined anti-Semitism as disliking Jews more than was rational. Okay? And he's the one we supported. I don't remember his name. Look him up. That's a saying that used to be attributed to Leo Strauss, but I know where he got it from. Got it from that Hungarian prime minister. So, what it is, I don't know. I've tried my life to figure it out. I think it may very well be this weird duplicity of people and, not duplicity, but it seems like duplicity, the doubleness of people and religion, which just doesn't fit and makes people think, yeah, they're really getting together behind everybody else's back and so forth. And part of it is just economic success. I mean, you look at the Chinese in Indonesia, the Chinese generally in Southeast Asia, they get treated in many ways the way the Jews do. And there are plenty of other causes. One of them I believe to be affirmative action. Namely, in Poland, in the 16th century, Jews were given special privileges along with Germans to help industrialize by their standard, improve, modernize the economy, and the Polish peasants hated them forever after. Lots of reasons, more than overdetermined. What do I know?
So it will never go away.
No, I didn't say that. I mean, what do I know? But I don't understand it fully, and I don't claim to. Michael.
Brett, you spoke at length about progressivism and the binaries that operate and how that contributes to
that was the thing I most wanted to say.
Yeah. Could you say a little more about other political movements or other political perspectives in the United States? Are they also caught up in binaries that are feeding this problem in indirect ways or perhaps in direct ways?
Look, I mean, everybody would always go to the Tea Party, right? And I think the difference is this. I mean, this is me talking. I don't want to be right. But the Tea Party and right-wing movements of this sort are usually the products of demoralization. They feel the times are going against them. They've got to draw a line. They've got to be resolved. They've got to no more of these rhinos, these wimpy Republicans like Boehner and McConnell. And that's on the surface. And underneath, it's panic. They really feel they're being run over. It's a reactionary movement. And it tends to do the binary. The left is usually a triumphal binary. Now, the Nazis were a triumphal binary on the right, no question. And the fascists generally. But the left is the one that really thinks historical reason is with us. We are with, and you know, both I think are very problematic. To me, the Tea Party isn't quite as bad as it's been described, but the potential of that, and if you look in Europe at the right-wing parties that are anti-immigration, you know, some of them are creepy as hell, like the Swedish Social Democrats. UKIP, maybe not so bad, but it could get bad, right? Le Pen, also very much to worry about, yeah? Fear will give you those binaries too, but also a kind of triumphalism, yeah? I once argued that, in public here at Kenyon, that the difference between the right and the left is that the right is stupid and the left is vain, yeah? The right is just self-interested in narrow ways and panics. And the left typically thinks well of itself, wants to be moral, that it's a kind of moral vanity. And it's real easy then to give in to righteous indignation. You have to choose which side you dislike less. Yeah, I chose one, most of you chose the other. But, you know, there are obviously no problems that are potentially.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, and this may be, I suppose, a trope, we refer to it these days, that I'll preface it by saying, having grown up in the 50s and 60s, if someone would have said people like George W. Bush will emerge as some of the staunchest supporters of Israel,
Yeah.
I would have thought, right.
Yeah.
Not just right as a bad pun, but sure.
Things,
And I'm wondering, is there an element, at least in some of this, of Christianity and other religions seeing some apocalyptic battle coming in the Middle East, which requires Israel to be a foe? I mean, it's a kind of anti-Semitism masked as apocalyptic vision. Is that just a trope?
well, I'll tell you. I mean, I know that's there, that in order for the conversion of the world, the Jews have to go back to Palestine. It's part of the theology.
And is it going to come out
But
well
I'll
for
tell
them
you
as
something.
cares?
I grew up, as it happens, with a lot of evangelical Christians and Catholics, and I've talked to them over the years. I've never got that. What I've always got is a straight, very humane feeling about people and what they're doing and how we admire that. And I've never seen it. And this is true here in Mount Vernon. This is true in my hometown. It's true wherever I've gone on buses and planes. I think that's something that sometimes Jews scare themselves with. I don't see it, hardly ever at all. For what little that's worth. Adam.
Yeah, could you just speak a little bit about what happened this summer in Israel and Gaza, and what a proportional response would be, what the response was?
Well, I'm not a military expert.
Political science.
As I read it, and I'm a Zionist, is that Hamas provoked the conflict, largely, I think, for internal Palestinian reasons. Yeah, with the joint control and all that. They did it with the kidnappings. And then they had their tunnels ready to go with Rosh Hashanah, and they started doing some serious bombing, which had to be answered. I've heard the argument made, wouldn't it have been great of Israel not to have responded to that? I don't think that's possible. You can't do that. So then it's lose-lose for Israel. Because you either go after the rockets, which are placed in civilian sites, and in every way, Hamas then has a stick to beat you over the head with, oh, you're killing babies, oh, you're killing children. Or you don't. Or you go in, which they did, as well, and then it's in some ways even worse. So I think they did what they had to, but they took a tremendous clobbering in the West. But they took that clobbering for the most part because of the predisposition to see them as the powerful imperial power kicking around the poor neighbors. Now those headlines that I talked about are an example. Yeah.
In the Irish Catholic Protestant conflict,
Yeah.
the term vote has been thrown around on both sides, most oppressed people ever. And I was wondering if, like, since the Jewish religion is based upon avoiding / like escaping oppression, like
Is it the Jewish religion is based
not
on
entirely, like
fighting
it's-
oppression?
or escape like fleeing Egypt and
Yeah, sure. We were slaves in Egypt.
yeah.
Right.
Does that play a role? Like,
Yes, undoubtedly. There's a line from Milton Himmelfarb. Jews are unlike Episcopalians and vote like Puerto Ricans. Jews vote to the left of their pocketbook all over the place. They support heavily an administration which is not particularly friendly, which can't bring itself even to talk about the people getting killed at the kosher market being Jews. And why is that? And it is because every year we remember we were slaves in Egypt. And this goes back in the Bible to Abraham. When God says to Abraham, get out of Ur and go someplace where you'll be a stranger, so you'll learn what it's like to be an underdog and be a stranger, that's where that starts. I was just teaching my class today on Genesis. The only thing that is unambiguously good that Abraham ever does is really give a good time to those travelers who show up. Then they're really angels, but he doesn't know it. And that is because he's learned what it's like to be an underdog. And so, absolutely, I mean, this is the J Street problem. J Street people are torn horribly, and I feel very sorry for them, between their commitment as Jews to social justice, to equality, to caring for everyone else, for tikkun olam, and on the other hand, not wanting to give up their Jewish identity wholly in terms of Israel. And that is why I think they have to keep talking about 2000. They have to keep pursuing the old argument on the Israeli left that you didn't make a good enough offer. I think that's just long gone. And it's agonizing